Hi everyone. Well, my name's Chris Wilson. I'm a research fellow at the Centre for Social Impact Swinburne, and I'm also the principal research analyst for the Australian Digital Inclusion Index. And this is a project that measures the level of digital technology access, affordability and skills for the Australian population and tracks this over time. And this is used in a bid to kind of inform policy and practice that sort of helps all Australians benefit from the use of digital technologies. So I'm really excited today to be kind of shifting out of that kind of individual space and into an organisational space and thinking about how or what we can know about the not-for-profit sector and how it's adapting to the use of digital technologies in their practices. And particularly, of course, in light of the recent COVID-19 impacts, and there's really been a real game changer this year. So, you know, it's a very exciting and kind of expanded field for me, moving from the individual to the organisational level. We're really blessed, actually, to have some longitudinal research in this area that extends back to 2015. It's been conducted by Infoxchange and its partners. And this is really useful in not only providing a kind of a picture of what's happening this year in 2020 and in the light of COVID, but also providing that historical context that shows us the kind of challenges that already existed prior to the COVID-19 situation, but also the way in which those organisations have made really remarkable adaptations given those challenges and utilised new opportunities to engage in the digital transformation of their own organisations and how they engage with their stakeholders and clients. So it's really a kind of very much a remarkable piece of research, and we're very lucky to have that longitudinal research in this space. In a minute, I'm going to invite David Spriggs from Infoxchange to take us through this research in some detail. But following his presentation, we'll hear from Mark Rayner of Wombat Housing Support Services, who will discuss how some of these sort of digital transformation or how some of those practices have been adapted in his organisation this year and provide some context to how those things have occurred over time in his own organisation. And we'll also hear from Catherine Brown of the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation. And she's going to discuss again some of those challenges facing her organisation this year, some of the ways their organisation have addressed those challenges, and also point to some really important sector-wide initiatives that we kind of see in the pipeline for digital transformation. But first, I'd like to introduce David. Anyone who's met David or knows David will know he's an absolute passionate advocate of how digital technologies can create a more inclusive society. I've known David for a number of years, and I'm always excited to see the work that he's producing through the organisation he works for. He is the CEO of Infoxchange and Connecting Up, and he's also the chair of the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance. So I'll now pass over to David. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris, for that warm introduction, and thank you very much to the Centre for Social Impact for organising today's webinar, and in particular Rhonda, who's done a lot of work to bring us all together today. And thank you everybody for joining. It's wonderful to see so many people here today and lots of familiar names and faces I can see in the participants list. So thank you very much for everybody for joining us. I would also like to start just by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet. I'm joining you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And would like to echo Rhonda's comments on NIDOC Week, and just, you know, what an opportunity that is to connect in with so many activities that are happening, and this year more so than last, virtually, given the COVID-19 situation. So would encourage everybody to connect with those activities. So today, as Chris said, we're here to talk about our latest digital technology in the not-for-profit sector report. And it's, as Chris said, it's been going for 5 years now. So it does give us a rich data set to look at what's been happening in the sector over time. You know, where have we been seeing growth? Importantly, where are improvements still needed? It covers across not-for-profits across Australia and New Zealand, and provides a bit of a benchmark for organisations as well to see where do they sit across some of the sector trends. And as Chris indicated, a lot of the excitement and interest this year has been, what's happened during COVID-19. And this survey was undertaken, during the pandemic, during the lockdown, at least in Victoria. And so there's a lot of insights from COVID-19 that we'll be able to share today. As Chris mentioned, it's been traditionally a collaboration between Infoxchange, Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand over that time. We were previously separate organisations, but 2 years ago we merged the organisations together under the banner of the Infoxchange group. Our vision is technology for social justice, and a huge part of our work is supporting the sector to build their capability through the use of technology. So we use this survey and this report to tune our own services and to see what's really needed by the sector. So I encourage you today to please ask questions as we go. Chris will interrupt me if there's something really burning, otherwise we'll make sure we cover them in the Q&A, but please put in questions as we go. And encourage you as well, just in the chat, to share your own examples and experience. I think it's one of the great things about these large group webinars is the opportunity to learn from each other. So diving into the report, and just to give you some perspective in terms of the scope, we had 490 organisations complete the survey. That's similar to what we've had in previous years, so it gives us a good consistent data set. It's a good number for us given the depth of this survey and the number of questions, so we really appreciate the time that everybody takes to fill in this survey every year, and I know there's a number of people on this webinar that did it this year, so thank you very much. And you can see there as well just a bit of a spread of organisation sizes. So it gives us a really representative sample of the sector and the challenges that face organisations of different sizes. And obviously in the detail of the data, we can pull out those challenges then by the size of organisation. Some of the key findings up here, we're going to dive into a number of these during the presentation, so I'm not going to read through all of these. But initially, when you look at some of these findings, it might look like a bit of doom and gloom. Only 30% of organisations had everything in place that they needed for staff to work from home from COVID-19. 54% of not-for-profits less than satisfied with the way they use technology. 49% of staff less than confident in using technology and systems. But I'm an optimist, and I kind of look at this and say, there's been a lot of work through COVID-19, and what we've been saying is we saw more digital transformation, I think, during the first 3 months of COVID-19 than we've seen over the previous 3 years in the sector. So I guess I'd encourage everybody today as we're going through this just to think about, how do we build on some of those advances and some of those sort of leaps in digital capability that we've made as a sector over this time, but how do we build on this coming out of COVID-19, and how do we help the sector as a whole on that digital transformation journey? And I'm very much a believer in collaboration and organisations working together in this space. So that's what I'd encourage. Yes, there's some real challenging data in here and statistics in here, but how can we make the most of that uplift we've seen during COVID? So to jump into some of the specific findings, and starting with COVID-19, I guess we've seen a couple of waves during COVID-19, and this first slide is sort of representing the initial disruption which everybody felt, right at the beginning of COVID, when so many organisations looked to do an immediate shift to staff working from home. And as you can see there, only 30% of organisations in the sector had everything in place to make that transition. A bigger group were in a reasonable position, had some work to do, and then a group of organisations that really weren't prepared at all. And we really saw that reflected in our Connecting Up platform. So Connecting Up provides donated versions of technology to not-for-profits, and just saw a massive increase in terms of not-for-profits accessing that platform, looking to get access to the free tools from Google, from Microsoft. A lot of people looking for donated Zoom licenses, for example, to enable collaboration and video conferencing. So that was kind of the first wave of activity that we saw during COVID. But this next slide, I think, talks to the second piece that we've seen. And the second piece has been around service transformation. So organisations, that immediate disruption, you can see on the left-hand side there, only 3% of services said that they had no change as a result of COVID-19. So almost everybody was impacted in this. But there was the immediate changes people made to services And then what we're seeing now, I guess, is organisations looking to think, how might they continue to transform their services, and what might it look like in a post-COVID world? So, while we've seen a digital uplift in the sector over this time, I think it's also fair to say we've seen a digital uplift in community through this time. I give the example of my own parents who, would have never joined a Zoom call, would have never used their computer for a video conference. And now when I call them, they're often saying, I have to get off because I have to get on a Zoom call to go and join, some community group that they're part of. So I think organisations are now thinking of, how can they deliver their services in a different way, whether that be mental health services, offering support online, some family violence services, financial counselling. There's been some great work done in the legal support area. And I'm always very much one to say this doesn't replace the need for face-to-face services, but really gives an opportunity for organisations to think through what are the opportunities through digital channels. And on the right-hand side there, you can see then some of the areas that organisations have looked at that have become a bigger priority. And, not surprisingly, things like video conferencing tools and collaboration tools to support those new ways of working and delivering services, but also really increasing the priority on building staff members' digital skills. And we see that as a huge area of importance. So moving to capability and skills, this is an area where we've seen an improvement this year, albeit off a fairly low base. One of the takeaways on the left-hand side of this slide is looking at how organisations rate themselves in terms of their digital capability and whether or not they've got an IT plan. And so clearly there's a correlation between those organisations that think this through and develop an IT strategy and an IT plan versus those that don't. My advice is always don't develop an IT plan in isolation. It should be something that's linked to the mission of your organisation, linked to your organisational strategy and business plan. But it is an area that needs planning, and clearly we can see a difference between those organisations that put in the time and those that don't. The staff confidence, again, that looks like a pretty terrible stat. 49% of staff are not confident or just a little bit confident. That's improved. I think that stat was about 60% last year. So we're making progress, but still a lot of work to do. And clearly the same around the overall satisfaction in the way organisations are using technology. The cloud has been another area where we've seen a lot of growth over the last few years. I think right across the sector now, 68% of the sector have either moved to the cloud or are in the process of doing so. But you'll see on that chart there, there's a significant difference between small to medium organisations and the larger organisations in the sector. So I still think a lot of work to go there. And not surprisingly, one of the stats that came out was those that haven't yet moved to the cloud were 4 times more likely to report being unprepared for staff in the transition to working from home. Some of the barriers are kind of spelled out in a bit more detail in the report, but it's around things like data security and privacy concerns, and a lot of lack of knowledge. And so we see a significant role there in terms of educating the sector further on the benefits of cloud, but also the sorts of security considerations that you need to work through in moving to cloud. Online presence, again, this has continued to grow, not surprisingly, and 90% of not-for-profits now regularly use at least one social media platform. A big change over the last year or two has been the number of platforms that each organisations use. So Facebook's clearly the leading platform there, but a lot of organisations reporting an increase in things like Instagram and Twitter, LinkedIn and YouTube over the last couple of years. Diving into some of that online presence and digital marketing in a bit more detail, and a couple of points I'll pick up here. One is the Google for Nonprofits program. So this is a free program that's available to eligible not-for-profits. We administer the program as part of Connecting Up for Australia and New Zealand on behalf of Google. And the survey this year showed only 20% of organisations in the sector are making use of that. So this is a program which gives you $10,000 a month of free Google AdWords to use on the Google platform. It gives you free access to all of the Google collaboration tools. And so particularly for people in the digital marketing space with the use of ads, it should be a no-brainer for most organisations to say, get on board with that program. So you can do that clearly by Googling Google for Nonprofits, and we can certainly help you with that at connecting up to get you on board. For those organisations that are part of it, we run regular webinars through Connecting Up on how organisations can make the most of some of those tools. So if you only take one takeaway today for organisations, if you're not on that platform, please have a look at it. The other one there on the right-hand side, I think is a little disturbing, that only 43% of not-for-profits are regularly tracking and reporting back on their performance in digital marketing. So if we're going to spend all of this additional time, and in some cases additional funds on digital marketing, we really need to be paying more attention to the success or otherwise of the campaigns that organisations are running. Information systems. This is an area where we continue to see improvement. I think in the last year, we've seen a reduction on organisations using paper documents, and please, this is 2020 now. But last year it was 7% of organisations were still recording their information on paper documents. That's dropped to 2%, fortunately, this year. But still, a whole 30% of organisations relying on Microsoft Word and Excel. When we're talking information systems, this is things like client case management systems, CRMs, stakeholder management systems. So a lot of work to go there. And the stat on the bottom right there, only 44% of organisations say that those systems actually help them to understand their organisation's service delivery and the outcomes from those services. Information security, I guess this is an area of real concern to me, and we've been having a number of discussions with the federal government on this, given it's, I think this is a major risk, not just for individual organisations, but for the whole Australia and New Zealand. And when you think about the information, the really sensitive information that's held by so many not-for-profit organisations, particularly those involved in service delivery. And you look at this stat, only 54% of organisations have ways of actively monitoring information security and cyber risks that could impact their org. And even within that 54%, only 44% are confident that they've got the skills and knowledge to manage those risks. So that's then down to 25% of organisations in total being confident in that space. So I think a huge amount of work to do there. Not all organisations can afford an information security lead or an ISO 27001 certification, which we have at Infoxchange, for example. But there's some great resources out there that can help organisations kind of make a start on this from government. We make a lot of them available through Connecting Up and Infoxchange. And again, if I was to give organisations just one takeaway from this webinar, the number one most effective thing you can do is enable multi-factor authentication on your platforms. So that's, for people who don't know what that is, that's when you're using your email, for example, and you type in your password, and then it pops up and it says, I've sent you a text message with a code. Could you please type in that code? And sort of research and reports from people like Google and Microsoft show that just that one step removes about 99% of attack vectors for people's email and collaboration tools. So, while it might seem like a highly complex area, and it is, quite complex, there's some simple things that organisations can do to help protect themselves in that space. I did say earlier, I don't think this is all doom and gloom. And so this, I guess, is one of the more positive elements of the report. And it's looking at the use of new and emerging technology by organisations. And over 50% of organisations surveyed are using at least one of these sort of emerging or new technologies that we've got listed up here. And I really think that, innovation and the use of emerging tech is absolutely alive and well in the sector. I was on a COVID innovation panel yesterday talking about the use of technology through COVID-19 and just some amazing work that's been going on in the sector. People like Justice Connect with their Dear Landlord service, which I know the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation has been funding, an incredible response through COVID-19 to help people who might otherwise be at risk of losing their properties and providing assistance. to people. We spoke to people like Orange Sky, who also won an award last week as part of the Australian Not-for-Profit Technology Awards, and the wonderful work they've been doing on the Wallaby platform to empower volunteers, and all of the work that they've been doing through COVID-19. There's been some great examples, I think, in Indigenous communities as well, and using a lot of these virtual technologies to connect community through COVID-19 and to share stories. So I think that's a really bright area, and I think an area that we can again kind of really build on as a sector. So getting close to the end, and would love to then see some questions and obviously hear from Mark and Catherine. Some of the top priorities and challenges. I look at these more as opportunities and challenges. That's just the way I'm wired. Not surprisingly, this always comes up in the sector, no matter what the subject. Budget and funding is a challenge for organisations. It's good to see the increase this year in terms of priority that people are putting on improving the digital capabilities of staff in their organisations to take advantage of some of the technology. And the biggest sort of challenges, around the staff capability and capacity. How do we train staff? How do we upskill staff? Access to affordable tech. It doesn't always have to be so expensive. So, sometimes when people are thinking about the massive budgets that are required, have you looked at what some of the donated platforms that are out there? Have you looked at how you can make the most effective use of that budget that you've got? Keeping abreast of changes, making the most of cloud. So I think that's an area where there's some great resources there, but I think, as a sector, we can do better in some of the capacity building programs and bringing some of those together. And I think Catherine from LMCF might talk a little bit more about that later. So just final piece from me is just a reminder, Infoxchange and connecting up. We're not-for-profit social enterprises. We're driven to work on a number of these issues that we've talked about today, and there's a number of areas that we can help with. So if the presentation today has kind of prompted some things where you're saying, how do I find out more about that? How do I get some help? Then please reach out. But for me, thank you very much for listening. I look forward to hearing from Mark and Catherine, and I'll now pass back to Chris. Thank you very much.
Terrific, David. That was fantastic and a great overview of really an exciting piece of research. And as I say, providing that kind of longer term historical narrative to see where we're situated right now. There was a bunch of questions in the chat, particularly around the Google Ads and that not-for-profit program. We'll get to those in the question time at the end, but that was there was certainly a lot of chat in the chat function around that. I was glad to see the privacy and security thing come up in your presentation, because that's a real, we always see that in the other digital inclusion space for individuals. It's great being online, but there are also risks to that, and we need people to build that knowledge around keeping themselves safe. So I'd now like to hand over to Mark Rayner. Mark has been involved in providing or working in the sort of homelessness area for over 20 years. He's been in various roles at the Wombat Housing Support Services as a case manager, a team leader, or a manager. So seen all levels of, I guess, the impact of how this technology thing rolling out into your organisation can impact on staff at all levels, and of course on clients. So I'd like now to pass over to Mark, who's going to tell us a bit about that kind of frontline experiences of transforming your organisation.
Great. Thanks a lot, Chris. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And like David, I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Maybe I thought I'd begin by sort of talking a little bit about what Wombat is. We're a homelessness service. We've been around for about 30 years or so. At the moment, we've got 33 staff, we've got 13 programs, and they work with a wide variety of people, from young people coming out of youth justice centres who are homeless to people in community or public housing who are at risk of losing their tenancy. So we work with people who are, 16, 17, and people who are 85, you know, and so a lot in between as well. But we're all social workers. We're not IT boffins. If we have a computer issue, you know, we kind of want to sit down with the computer, tell it it's in a safe space, and ask how it's feeling, you know. And if that doesn't work, we'll try and elbow it or hit it or something. So, and that's probably our more advanced computer literate staff. So I just wanted to sort of paint that picture of what we're like. Our focus is on working with clients, supporting people, and IT is always sort of considered a secondary thing, or the thing that we get annoyed with because it doesn't work properly or connect the way we want it to. I've worked at Wombat for 20 years, as you know, Chris was saying. I'm the general manager, and I'm kind of also the IT guy, which is really weird because I don't have too many IT skills. And I imagine that's probably like, that's similar to a lot of not-for-profits where we all just wear different hats. And I think as a general manager, you have to be able to, you know, dip your feet into lots of different roles. So I'm HR, I'm IT, the list is endless of what I step into each day. And you know, I think that we're a small agency, so we all have to be pretty flexible about these things. So, you know, the question has to be, why am I here talking at this IT forum? Because you probably know way more than I do. And the reason is because we managed to move onto the cloud just before this horrible global pandemic hit. And so then I guess the question you probably want to ask is, how do we know? Or did we know it was coming? And you know, the thing is, weirdly enough, maybe we did, like to some extent. And you know, to really kind of answer that, I want to give you a bit of history about Wombat and when I first came in, what the environment was like, and leading up to sort of where we are today. So I guess from my perspective, when I first started, so over 20 years ago, we were working off a server environment, and the server was this big box that made a lot of noise, and we were scared to go near it in case we stuffed something up. We had someone who would come and fix things if we did stuff things up, and you know, his name was Fred, and he was kind of mysterious. We kind of didn't really know what he did, but it was really a kind of reactive response where he would come in, fiddle with some things, swear a little bit, fix the problem, and then leave. And our server was, you know, quite frankly a mess. There was so much stuff on it. It was we'd sort of built up, like, you know, we'd gone from using paper to using Word to record case notes, and then there was some other systems on it as well, and it was just adding bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, and there wasn't really much coherence there. And we ended up well Fred ended up taking a holiday to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and he told us before he left that he gave us some details for someone else to if we encountered any problems. And so we encountered some problems, and our computers were down for a few days, and you know, we ended up contacting this person. He didn't know who we were or anything, and so he ended up saying, I can't help you, but maybe this person can. And someone came in and sort of fixed it up. And for us at that time, so that was probably in about, you know, 2011, at that time we realized, well, we'd sort of outgrown that previous method of dealing with IT issues. So we sort of cast the net around to similar agencies that we knew that we worked with, and we found a provider who was a little more proactive and actually started to, you know, hopefully get us into some sort of more coherent IT landscape that was going to actually work for us. And so probably we stayed with them for about 6 years or so. It was that process was really good, because I think as our IT literacy increased, we realised we started to sort of outgrow them as well in some sense. We developed an intranet using a program called Alfresco, which was free, and there were some real benefits to that, but there were also some real drawbacks to that. And I guess what happened was we felt like we didn't really have this coherent IT plan. Things had improved, but we didn't really know where we were working towards. Also, we sort of felt like the server was a bit of an albatross on our back, just given that they're so expensive, and every 10 years or so you got to buy another one. And so we're not funded well enough to continue to do that, and I don't know how we'd managed it up until then. But the idea of $30,000, $40,000 coming up next year wasn't particularly appealing to us. So, but back to the fact that we don't know anything about computers and we're not boffins, we thought, well, maybe we need to get a consultant in or something. And so we researched that, and that was ridiculously expensive as well. So we ended up actually hiring someone for 12 months to develop an ICT plan for us. And that was really great, because they stepped in and dealt with all of the IT issues that we were having. So even though we had this provider, there were some issues with them, and you kind of needed someone to oversee them. So we got them to basically take the load off, particularly me, which was fantastic, and also one of our admin workers. And so they got a real sense of what our workflow was at the agency, what we were trying to achieve, what we needed to do, and then also developed this huge report and pointed out things that we weren't even really aware of. This is what she came up with. She prepared a big report, but this is just a bit of a takeaway. At the time, Wombat has a stable, usable ICT environment with tight budgetary constraints and limited in-house ICT skill. I think she was talking about me. Due to a lack of IT innovation, high hardware maintenance, redundancy of hardware, a continued requirement for mobile work, compliance, and greater need of collaboration, Wombat needs to reconsider its ICT environment. So we did, and we really quickly realised that the future lay in the cloud, and we felt like we wanted to improve, the reliability of our IT and sustainability of our IT. We wanted to ensure that the client information was stored securely and accurately and could be accessed easily. We wanted to work out how we could be more efficient. We realised, it was 2019, and we were probably operating as you would in 2007. I don't know. And we also wanted to be able to communicate better and collaborate easier and things like that. There were so many things that we felt like IT was holding us back, and particularly for workers in the field who need to access things at any time when they're with a client because something's come up and the client is like, I really want to work on this, and we know that you have to do it now. We were just like, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll come back next week with that piece of paper that you can sign and blah, blah, blah. And so we were getting quite frustrated. So, and we felt like there were some issues with our IT provider at the time too. So she recommended quite a few providers. We met a few, and we decided to go with Infoxchange. And even during that experience, it was difficult for us too, because they were talking about Office 365 and SharePoint, and we were like, what's a SharePoint? And we could really only sort of project what it could be like based on what we knew already, and it was there was the translation was part of the issue. I think it was difficult to work out at that time, but we knew we had to move forward. But primarily, the main push was because of warranties, licenses, having latest software, and it was really about usability for staff. The frustrations were starting to rise, and we felt like that was a major issue about why we decided to upgrade. But ultimately, I think that there was the usability side of things, and then there was the some of the risk factor stuff. And so as a management team, we sit down and we plan for any potentials and look at risk quite a lot. And this comes back to what I was saying at the start. Did we know about the pandemic? And well, one of the items on our risk log that we go through every few months was, a nationwide pandemic, and we kind of snickered at it. It came as part of SARS to put that in. We knew it was a possibility, but we didn't treat it that seriously, though we did have some strategies to mitigate that. But if truth be told, it was really, about the disaster management stuff, about what happens if the building burns down. We've got a server that goes with it. How do we continue to operate? How do we ensure our clients don't miss out on service delivery? So a lot of that stuff was the guiding force in terms of moving to the cloud. And so it took us about, we started working with Infoxchange in July last year, and it was probably November, December that we actually moved. And that was primarily due to the fact that our internet was terrible and it couldn't sustain SharePoint. So we were able to get our internet up, we were able to move across, and to some extent, that's sort of where the work began. So in February, I went on a holiday to South Korea. In retrospect, that may not have been the best move, as the lady started spreading COVID around from a religious ceremony. So I'm going to spend a few days there and then bounce back. And I ended up coming back to work in late March, at which time, I think a week before, people had started working from home, and we realised we didn't have the hardware to allow staff to do that. So they were working from home with iPhones and iPads and whatever laptops we could find. A couple of people grabbed their desktop and took that home, but obviously that wasn't sustainable. So we just had to basically immediately just purchase all this hardware and work out how we were going to do it. So in a way, we had the fundamentals, but we had to do a lot of work. So I feel like we're in that, was it 48%, David? I think it was, that we're kind of there, but had to do a bit of work to take the next step. So we were definitely there. And what it has done, I guess, in thinking about this, when I mentioned, the elbowing of computers and stuff to try and make them work, some staff really were recalcitrant when it came to the uptake of digital technology. Some were really optimistic and excited and looking at potentials, but of course you're going to have that range, aren't you? And what working from home and being forced into having to find solutions meant that we had buy-in, which we would not have had otherwise. Because, and we did a lot of work to achieve that. We set the foundations. We had a call it the IT Champions Working Group, which was made up of all levels of staff who were sort of problem solving around IT and coming up with solutions and guides and things like that. We had a page on the front page of SharePoint, which were SharePoint questions, and so people would put those questions in and someone would answer. Normally it was me emailing Infoxchange saying, how do you do this? And then putting the answer up. So then we did some one-on-one sessions with people who were really struggling, just to try and get them up to speed. But the willingness due to COVID was fantastic in a way, because it really helped us move to the next level. And now we've got teams bouncing around. We've got video catch-ups in the morning and the afternoon for most of the teams. We're playing Pictionary and stuff like that, just basically to try and keep morale up, because now we're concerned about isolation. So that's pretty much where we are now. And now we're thinking, like, with a potential return to work, you know, we're going to try and incorporate some of these strategies because we've developed lots of efficiencies in this work now. When partially we go back to work, deal with bubbles or whatever the hell it is that we're going to be doing. Yeah, David, you'll be happy to know we've got MFA and we really like it in terms of security. It's a good thing. And so I feel like we sort of weathered the storm of COVID, and we're actually going to use it to launch us into where we're going to go to next. Because I feel like one of the statistics was about how satisfied are you with your IT systems and everything. I feel like we've got the grounding, but we haven't taken that next step. And then that next step is sort of, I feel like, my role, not our Infoxchange's role, which is to think about what the culture is at Wombat, think about what the workflows are at Wombat, think about the ways we need to work and how we can make technology work for us. So we're learning technology, we're getting the grounding, and then the next step is what's the potential and how can we make it mold into the way we want to work and we need to work as an agency and the kind of culture we want to develop at the agency. And I feel like that's quite a role for us too, which is, you know, everyone thinks about culture in terms of bricks and mortar or people, but you need to create the environment around which the culture is built. And I think digital technology isn't thought about in that way too much. And that's some of the thoughts that I've been having recently. And just to end, ironically, we had a planning day last year where just as Infoxchange sort of took over our IT, and we had someone from Infoxchange come out and say to us, you know, all these wonderful things about SharePoint, which we probably understood about 30% of it. And we had said to them, don't say much about working from home, okay? Like, just underhype it if you can. And you know, to their credit, they did. And to the credit of Wombat workers, they picked up on it. And it became this big thing about how much they want to work from home, and you know how easy and you know the lifestyle makes it so much better, and productivity will improve, and all of that sort of stuff. And so we were, oh great, here we go. And so now everyone's been working from home. Now they can't wait to come back. Everyone's like, when can I come back? So it's a bit ironic. Anyway,
that's a lesson we've all actually learned, I think, Mark. It's nice to be at home, but it's also nice to be around people.
Thanks, Chris.
We might leave it there if that's all right, Mark. I mean, one of the big takeouts I took from that was just having a plan was really important. Now, I noticed from the reports, from the report as well, that those organisations that have an IT plan have some sort of sense of how things work and where they're going. That makes a real difference, and it seems to have made a real difference in the transition into when you're then facing a crisis, to have that kind of background plan in place. So fantastic. We've got many questions for you, Mark, in the chat feed, so we'll get to those during the question time. I'd now like to introduce Catherine Brown, Dr. Catherine Brown, who is the CEO of the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, which is Australia's largest and oldest community foundation. Catherine's a lawyer with experience in the not-for-profit and philanthropic sectors, and recently completed her PhD through my esteemed institution, the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne. So I'm now going to hand over to Catherine, who's going to tell us a little bit about how her organisation has dealt with the COVID-19 experience, and also point to some really exciting initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging, and also note that it is NAIDOC week, so great time to celebrate. So I thought I'd first just speak about our own internal experience and then talk about some of the grants we've been making as part of our response to COVID-19, because I think they reflect a lot of what David's research is showing, and then also speak about an initiative that we funded Infoxchange very, very recently. So that's some exciting news for the sector. So first of all, just to explain that we were established in 1923 by the Lord Mayor of the day then, and our job essentially is to respond to the big challenges of the day facing Greater Melbourne. So in those days, it was actually people returning from World War I with a lot of health issues and rehabilitation needs, and there was no public health system then, so people who were in financial disadvantage couldn't afford health services. So that's what our first campaign and first projects were about. So, and ever since then, we've worked to respond to all the different, waves of migration, all the big issues, the health issues like HIV/AIDS and anorexia, all new emerging challenges, and especially at the moment, obviously, homelessness and climate change and unemployment. So they would be the three biggest. And then we have a very strong response to disasters over all these years. I don't think there's many disasters in Victoria we weren't, and even broader than that we haven't been involved in. And the fascinating and strange thing about the COVID pandemic is that it's a very different disaster response. So in order to respond to COVID-19, we've actually had to really have 4 streams. And I'll talk about a couple of these projects that we funded in the different streams in a moment. But the first stream is responding to the health crisis and the needs for incredibly fast-moving health treatment for COVID, and learning as they're going. I mean, and Australia's health system has stood up extremely well. Then the next one is scaling up services to meet growing demand, and the social and economic consequences of COVID-19, have been obvious, since March really, and will continue for quite some time now, obviously, in terms of unemployment. So that's been a real concern, and I will talk about a few projects briefly, including the Justice Connect Dear Landlord project, which David mentioned. And then we've been looking at the charitable sector broadly and the resilience of the charitable sector as we go through COVID. I often think we have, Medicare's our health safety net, but the charitable and the not-for-profit sector more generally is really our social and environmental, in fact, safety net. And they need to be protected and they need support. So we look quite broadly at that, and we've got a few initiatives in that area. And then the 4th stream is recovery, and we have been quite passionate about the idea that out of this very difficult situation, we have some really big opportunities for some transformational thinking and for addressing some of the big issues we have, like the need to really speed up our climate transition, and also to increase the supply of affordable housing, social and affordable housing, which are both issues we've worked on for quite some years now, and through that actually create jobs. So we've been working on projects like Everybody's Home, which is a campaign that the Council for Homeless Persons is doing in relation to social housing, and then also work with the Smart Energy Council and Beyond Zero Emissions, the last one on 1 million jobs in clean tech and clean energy. So, it's a very strange time we're all in. There's kind of really big challenges, and there's also really big opportunities. So if I just talk momentarily about our own experience as a foundation and a larger not-for-profit, we're in the fortunate position that we actually had a business continuity plan, and we have a governance, audit and risk committee. So we actually always put quite a bit of effort into this area. And even more particularly, we were fortunate that we have an internal audit program. And maybe something I learned from being on a hospital board for quite a while is that internal audit shouldn't just be about finance. And so there's a really wonderful opportunity to think about other processes and systems. So we've had a data security internal audit completed this year, which is very helpful, and are doing more work on cybersecurity in terms of an internal audit too. So I know these sound really boring things, but in fact, they actually have proven to be really helpful in this COVID-19 challenge. So the other fortunate thing was that we actually had a business improvement program, which started probably 4 years ago. And we articulated what we wanted from a more integrated way of working in terms of our information systems. So we actually wanted to make sure, because we work in inspiring philanthropy, so in holding funds for people who want to be philanthropists and in holding bequests, but also in our grant making. So we wanted both those sides to be more effective. So we went through a very arduous project process of ultimately transitioning to Microsoft Dynamics CRM with Razor's Edge, and both integrated with NAV for the financial system, and obviously at the same time Office 365 and SharePoint. So thankfully we actually had everything we needed to just, it actually became quite obvious that we were going to have to leave the office, and it was really perhaps on the Wednesday I said, right, that's it, we're all moving home, and by Friday everybody was there. And we certainly had to, a few people have mentioned, we had to buy a bit of hardware, and also a few people needed Wi-Fi sort of upgrades, but generally it's been remarkably smooth from that point of view. And just really, but these projects are not easy, and it's taken us quite a long time, and we're not yet where we see ourselves being. We want to be able to do our impact reporting really well, and we want to do all our stakeholder engagement even better, and we've also been working on our website. So that's sort of the background. I suppose the message is any forward planning you do is actually, even while it's tedious at the time, it's actually really paid off for us. So now getting really to what's our real job in responding to COVID-19, and the first thing was responding to the health impacts, and I'll come back to one of those projects, but the second one was scaling up online services. And it's hard to imagine the capacity demand that was suddenly there in April. If you can think of all the people who've never really ever had to think about accessing community services and so on, it was just incredible demand. So Justice Connect, which we funded in the past for their Dear Landlord tenancy advice service, they're just overwhelmed with people who were trying to renegotiate leases and work out how they could hold on to their homes. So we gave them a capacity building grant to scale that up, which has been really effective. And we've also since given Justice Connect a grant to create a whole Build Back Better legal service, which is basically it's just actually been all approved, which will provide sort of more support for not-for-profits in all different legal areas as they go through their sort of business transformation during and post-COVID. So Infoxchange, as you would all know, runs Ask Izzy, which is a huge really resource for Australia in terms of community health and social services. Had all the locations of COVID testing, etc. And they really had to cope with a huge demand as well. So we were very happy to partner with them and do a matched grant to help them expand and scale up. And also Gather My Crew, which was a new digital platform we'd funded from inception after the Burke Street massacre. It's a platform which enables you to call on your crew in a time of disaster or crisis, and that can be your family and friends. But we soon came to see through COVID that actually people were helping each other in other ways as well. So Gather My Crew expanded to include street crews and health crews, so health team crews, and that was very effective for those groups. In terms of, we funded quite a number over the years. We have actually more and more been funding digital capacity building, but in terms of just responding to COVID, just a couple of examples. We funded Wise Employment, which work in vocational support for people with mental illness. So they moved their employment services online, and they set up e-learning programs, and also they transitioned the vocational coaching to one-to-one and group video conferencing. So we were able to support their transformation, really, their transition into this new way of working. And Uniting Victoria Tasmania, we supported their data collection for their Uniting and Connected initiative, which is also really a transformation of the way they work. And it's very much focused on reducing the risk of mental illness associated with social isolation, poverty, homelessness, and some of the other areas that they were working in. So we were pleased to support those. They're both, transformational grants, really. One I would like to highlight because it's really innovative, is the Australian Living Learning Consortium. So this is relating to health aspects of COVID-19. And we'd funded Covidence, which is the not-for-profit organisation, to use AI to fast-track clinical guidelines from research to the bedside. And it's been so well developed, it's actually subscribed to internationally by a lot of different medical sort of departments in universities and institutions. So Associate Professor Julian Elliott, who we've come to know over perhaps a 5-year journey funding the sort of evolution of this this platform, he asked if we could help expand it to support the National COVID-19 Clinical Evidence Task Force. So we did that alongside the Potter Foundation and the Ramsay Foundation. And basically they've gathered information from across Australia's healthcare networks, and the COVID-19 clinical guidelines are able to be continually updated and made available immediately to clinicians in ICU, respiratory specialists, GPs and other health practitioners. So it's just a very good example of using technology to enhance services, but also the speed that they've been able to operate. It's really stood Australia actually in really great stead. So coming to really the last aspect I wanted to talk about is the digital capability of the not-for-profit sector and the opportunity for transformation. And I met David we had met before because Infoxchange is actually our IT provider, but I hadn't really got to know David until we started having conversations about what would a digital transformation hub for the Australian charitable sector, look like, and had some very interesting roundtables with SVA and CSI and other people interested. And we weren't quite sure what would happen with the federal budget. It didn't get into the sort of initial announcements, but we thought there's still there's an opportunity for philanthropy to go in early and get things started. And we could identify that Infoxchange had access to a lot of low bono and pro bono and hardware and software and skills, and that by investing in Infoxchange to start the development of the digital transformation hub, that would really set them up well. So we have approved a grant of $400,000 to Infoxchange to start this, and it's pretty exciting, and I'll let David talk about it. But we're also waiting to hear on 2 other foundations to join us, and we're still hoping that government might partner as well. I think the thing that's great is it's building on expertise and knowledge that's there, deep knowledge of the not-for-profit sector. But I think there's an opportunity not just to sort of patch things together and sort of get through COVID. There's actually the broader opportunity to do some transformation and to help people really build their capability and resilience for a post-COVID world. So it's a mixture of web-based resources, capacity building and tailored advice. So I'll let David talk about it more, but we're very excited to support it and very happy to be part of this discussion. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That was excellent. And we have a range of questions, but now I'm super excited to hear about the opportunities of digital transformation that you've just mentioned. So I might actually pass straight over to David and see if you can tell us a little bit more about this initiative.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. And it is absolutely hot off the press, as Catherine said. I'm very excited about it, and a huge thank you to Catherine. I really think this is philanthropy at its best, when philanthropy can get initiatives started very quickly. As Catherine said, hopefully over time we'll have some other foundations come on board and the federal government as well. But essentially the concept behind this hub is to bring together a number of the threads that we've been talking about today. So there's some great resources out there for the sector, but how do you bring them together and how do you help organisations on that digital transformation journey? So there'll kind of be a website around this, which will bring together a lot of these donated and discounted technology platforms. also technology platforms that do cost money, but that are being used across the sector. So organisations will be able to come in and say, well, I'm an organisation in the housing and homelessness space like Mark. How do I find out what other organisations similar to me are using, and get a bit of a leg up there from a tech space, from a tech perspective, bringing together a lot of the resources that we've talked about. So just even in the chat, there was things in there about, where do I start on information security? How do I make better use of AdWords? All of those sorts of things, bring those resources together. Then kind of we've got the concept of putting together an expert bar in quotes is what we're calling it, but it was really, to Catherine's terminology, around providing tailored support to the sector and capacity building programs. So some of that will be things like webinars, but others we often find with organisations, they just want to reach out and talk to somebody. So giving people the opportunity to do that, just connect with one of our people, and really we're seeing this as a whole of community effort. So this isn't just Infoxchange and connecting up resources. There's a lot of people that want to volunteer their time, and there's corporate partners that want to do that. There's others in the sector that are willing to contribute to that. So just making those connections for somebody that says, well, I could go and try and read all of this stuff about information security and cloud, but I really don't get it. Where do I start? Just let me have a half hour or a 1 hour chat with somebody to get me started, and then be able to kind of connect in with them over time. So that's the concept behind that. And then the final part is around the piece we've just been talking about around skilling up staff in the sector. And so making available a whole lot of training programs that have been designed specifically for staff in the sector to help them build their level of digital capability. So that's something we're really excited about. Stay tuned. We'll obviously be talking more about it over the next couple of months as we launch that initiative. But a huge thank you from me to Catherine for your leadership in really pulling this together on behalf of the sector. And as I say, we really see it as a whole of community initiative. This isn't just Infoxchange connecting up an LMCF. This is how do we bring the whole sector on this journey. So yeah, thank you very much.
And the whole collaborative approach is one of the things that's so exciting about it. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, so we'll encourage everybody on this webinar to be sharing their stories on that platform as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I've had a range of questions come in. I'm going to start actually again with one for you, David, which is really around the report, and some questions around whether we're seeing any sort of demographic trends here about, what the workforce is looking like in the not-for-profit sector, what the relationship is with that sort of workforce change and the kind of capacity for digital transformation, and of course, both in terms of opportunities perhaps, but also some of the challenges in that space. So I wonder if you could, if the report actually says anything about that, you could help us out.
Yeah, and there's some interesting links, Chris, back to what you were discussing earlier, kind of around the broader digital inclusion challenges of Australia, and some of those are mirrored in the sector workforce as well. But there are certainly challenges, and it wouldn't surprise you. It's often that older demographics that are struggling to keep up. But it's also, I think Mark put it very eloquently when he said, we're social workers. We don't, you don't spend half of your time training as a social worker learning about technology. So I think, we kind of talked in some of the stats in the report in terms of the low base that the sector's coming off. But I think there has been, a tremendous increase over the period of COVID-19. So we're really interested to see what we see in next year's report, because while this report was taken during COVID-19, it'll be really interesting to see, how much more comfortable people are after having been through this period.
Yeah, and certainly from the work that we've been doing in digital inclusion over the years, some of those key older demographics, that the level of digital inclusion there is quite low. And actually, I think in your introduction, you were mentioning, or in your presentation, some things around the skills and confidence around using technologies, and around that 50% mark is what we see across the population in terms of people feeling that they lack confidence in using digital technology. So it's not just a sectoral based issue; it is one that is across the population and can be addressed both at an organisational level but also at individual levels. So anyway, this a little sidestep into the Digital Inclusion Index. But I have a question for Mark around the use of or this sort of digital transformation. A lot of what you spoke about was sort of very much on the organisational side, and I wonder whether you might say something about the interface with your particular client group who would also in our work look like they'd had some digital inclusion challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had a few thoughts about that, because I mean, many of our client group, we work with young people, so the technology stuff is sort of, they're probably better than we are in that respect. But, you know, many of our people who we work with who are a bit older, you know, don't have mobile phones, you know, don't have computers. You know, there's a whole world that's sort of passing them by. And, you know, when it comes to engaging them, and particularly when you can't go out and see them due to COVID, that's been a real challenge. And we don't have any particular special way to engage with them other than face to face. Some of them, you know, you can't contact on the phone. And so what it meant for us was a real challenge for all of our social workers who were, you know, so used to going out, being with clients, spending time, developing trust, assisting them create change in that way, to suddenly, you know, be restricted to phone contact, or, you know, we've got some people who have actually never physically met the people that they're working with, and yet, you know, we're having expectations that they're going to tell us about what some of the most important, or some of the trauma they've experienced, or some of the struggles that they're having. And so, you know, it actually, it's created some issues for some staff who, you know, they feel like they're not getting the same value that they were in the past. When it comes to technology and our client group, we're actually at the moment conducting a client survey. We do that on a regular basis. We've used a whole bunch of methods in the past. This is the first time we're ever using like a link to an app that people can, you know, email it or text it to someone. And so we know we're going to miss out on a certain proportion of our client group. And so we're going to have to get onto the phone or focus group kind of concept in the future. But we're just testing it just to see, because we're like timidly putting our toe into the water just to see whether we can actually start to use some of the technology with this client group that we haven't before. Like I said, youth is very different, but when it comes to the older demographic, it's a bit more difficult.
Certainly, thanks, Mark. There's been quite a lot of chat in the chat box around privacy and security issues, and I know, David, you touched upon it, but this might open this question up for the entire panel. It is a real challenge, and because, of course, you know, much of the organisations that are engaged here, you know, this is new. This is a new dabbling into new forms of online data collection and data sharing. And I wonder whether, in your experience, you can tell us a little bit about how we might sort of address some of those privacy and security challenges.
Yeah, do you want me to go? I'm going to go first, and yeah, we'd love to hear from Mark and Catherine. And there's a few things from our perspective, and I guess one is to not look at it as purely a technology issue. It's far beyond that. It's kind of looking at the privacy and information security across the whole organisation. So, you know, it should be an item that's on the board's agenda every meeting to be reviewing and asking questions about. So, I guess that's the first thing around having some leadership in that area. The second is at least some basic form of planning. So kind of understanding, you know, what the data assets that you hold are, what your obligations are around privacy and security. And doing a bit of an assessment and audit, and then developing a plan. And Catherine talked about the benefits of their organisation going through that process. And as I say, kind of beyond that, it's, you know, there's often some simple places where organisations can start, like the multi-factor authentication we've all talked about. A big piece we always see is that's missing for a lot of organisations is the staff education. So there's no point having this, you know, beautifully well protected IT system that you think is impenetrable from the outside, if then your staff are going into your case management system and printing out client records and sensitive information and leaving paper lying around the office. I mean, that may sound obvious, but the number of organisations that don't really invest in that level of staff training, whether it be for things like how they're accessing systems or whether it be for how to spot, phishing attempts where, staff get emails asking them to click on a link and then they click on it. Often people then feel ashamed and stupid that they clicked on that link. The first thing they should do is go and tell somebody in their organisation that they did that. And there shouldn't ever be any, kind of penalty or threatening behaviour around why were you so stupid to click on that link. That should be immediately, thank you very much for telling us, and we can now go and investigate what that was. So I think that's a big area to work on, is the staff education side.
I'm not sure if either of our other panelists want to weigh in on that. Catherine?
I agree with everything David said. I think one thing that does strike me is that it's such a fast changing area of law. So privacy and security is just, I think we're getting more amendments to the Privacy Act soon. And so you're developing your policies, and it's an area in terms of compliance that you're really having to check quite often. So yeah, it's certainly an area you need to be watching and keeping on the audit committee list, I think, both privacy and security. Yeah, and the training's great. And I already mentioned the internal audit, but I think there's such value in someone external, looking at the systems and processes and talking to the staff and actually getting to the bottom, are there any high risks, or, if there are medium or low ones, what are you going to do? What plan have you got to address them? Just means you give it some attention.
Catherine, is that an area that, the sector, of course, very focused on service delivery and investing in that. And when you look at where the money goes, very focused on delivering for their clients and users. I'm just wondering, this is this sort of overlying layer of that we often don't invest in. And I'm just wondering, are there or should there be other forms of support from that outside the sector that coming in? Is that where government can help?
I'm not sure whether government's quite, government funding might help, but government might not be in terms of the privacy, but certainly with security. The not-for-profit law service that Justice Connect have, and I'm not sure Infoxchange would have some services relating to this, but I think you'd be amazed if you talk to your normal auditor, your financial auditor. Some of them will actually have a data kind of cyber area as well, and you never know, you might be able to convince them to help you pro bono or pro bono, or there's yeah.
Terrific.
David, did you want to add to that?
No, I think government does play a piece role. I think there's a challenge at the moment that government are starting to add more and more into service agreements with not-for-profits around information security obligations. And I think that's a little unfair if the organisations then signing those agreements, really don't have the capacity to follow through on those requirements. So I think it's an area that government does need to think about, how they can better support organisations in the sector to then, meet the compliance obligations that they're effectively putting on them. Yeah,
so that's where the funding, you need to kind of acknowledge if you're expecting more, that it's a bit like evaluation, it's sort of quite wise to actually allow for that in budgets, because it's going to be more work.
Excellent. I've got a range of questions around the Google program, David, and I'm sure some of this might be you may be able to point to some materials that are online that people can have a look through. But the questions kind of in a range of issues around a range of concerns, I guess. One was about how long it takes to sign up, and there's questions also about whether Google has thought of expanding this program into the social enterprise sector. But there was also some critique of the program, not really critique, but in terms of its resource intensive use on the staffing side in the not-for-profit sector. So, it does take a bit of time apparently to an effort to maintain. So I wonder whether you could kind of speak a little broadly around that program.
Yeah, so around a few of those things. Firstly, kind of the eligibility and getting up and running. For most organisations, that should be less than 24 hours. If you're already registered on the Connecting Up platform, it should be pretty close to immediate. It does take a little bit longer sometimes if there's some more work just verifying that an organisation's eligible for the program. And that's probably a good segue into the second point. So sort of not-for-profit social enterprises are generally eligible for the Google for Nonprofit program. But at the moment, sort of for-profit social enterprises aren't. That's something that we're working on with Google, and not just Google, but a number of the major tech companies that provide donations in this space. Was interesting in the last Google Impact Challenge that was held in Australia. Two of the winners of that program that won $1 million were both for-profit social enterprises. So I think that ground is slowly changing, and organisations are understanding that some social enterprises are for profit, but they're definitely for purpose organisations. So I think hopefully we'll see more change in that space over time. It's always a challenge on how you then measure the eligibility, rather than just a commercial organisation claiming that they're a social enterprise. So you just kind of need to put some bounds around it, obviously, but we're working on that. And then I think the other question was around making the use of those free ads. So great that you get $10,000 a month of free advertising, but you do need to put some work into understanding that, and what are the keywords that you might want to put on Google that are most relevant for your organisation. How much you'll be able to make the most of that. I would point to it, somebody might be able to put a link in the chat, but through Connecting Up, we offer a number of webinars for the sector on how to make the most of those Google AdWords piece. So there's people from outside the sector who come in and donate their time to provide those webinars. That's often a good way to get started. It's also an area where sometimes it is worth just spending a little bit of money. You can get somebody to come in and consult with you for a day or two on what are the keywords that might be best for your organisation, particularly those organisations that might be looking to drive online fundraising or online donations. Like a lot of these things, sometimes it is just worth spending a little bit of external money to get some professional advice on. And I think we've got a directory of some of the people that might be able to help with that on the Connecting Up site, but also it's something we want to take on as part of that digital transformation hub, helping organisations get started on that journey.
Fantastic, thanks, David. There's been a couple of questions also around, I think, this transition space where you've been working on sort of commercial public platforms, using Word, using Excel, using that Microsoft suite, and then shifting into something that's more that's organisationally specific, that is a little bit more systems-based, and the sort of challenges involved in making that transition from sort of that kind of everyone working on their own individual documents and then moving across to new platforms. Anything that any of the panelists can say about how one might go about sort of approaching that initial stage and what might be important in terms of resourcing for that?
I was going to suggest maybe Mark can add, given Mark's sort of been through specifically that. I mean, the general advice we give to organisations is to look at what other organisations that might be similar to you. What are they using and what's working for them? I think there's definitely an element there of learning from other organisations in the sector. And it's not all plain sailing, and these implementations are often quite challenging. Normally, one of the biggest challenges is the change management within staff to say, we're now using this platform and we're working this way. So why are we doing that? And helping staff come on that journey. But I think there's a lot that organisations can learn from each other in this space too. But maybe Mark.
From our perspective, we moved from the Word system to assuming it was a cloud-based system, and now we're on a Australia-wide cloud-based system called SHIP, and that was thrust upon us, and it's way better than what we were doing, so that's a really positive thing. But still, I think it's what David mentioned about change management and about one set of training isn't going to solve the problem. It's an ongoing thing. There needs to be multiple mechanisms, and there needs to be sort of an individually sort of tailored approach depending on the individual staff member. So, you do the catch-all training, you keep it as part of the ongoing discussion. Like I said, we had our IT champions group. It's amazing if you put staff together and ask them to fulfill a role, and then you call them champions, how into it they are. And we also run a survey too about we ran a survey about SharePoint and the change that had occurred, and asked people what their issues were. And sneakily, we did it via SharePoint, via the Forms app on Office 365, and so we sort of getting people to engage via that anyway. And then all the issues that they've had, we've sort of sat down and addressed as we've continued along. So we've run the survey twice now, just to check in, but our staff aren't shy, so they tell us when they're annoyed by something, and then we've used the complaints and annoyances to think, well, how can we enhance this? So yeah, I think it's really about the change management and engaging with individual staff members, because if you have a really negative staff member, then they can sort of drag others down. But counter is you have a positive one. And
yeah, and I think there's been a bit of chat about that in the chat feed as well, around that idea of about that kind of positive engagement and trying to reduce the anxieties around particularly around staff using new technologies. I've got another question. It's on that, again, it's on that sort of client side, and it's on the organizational side of how do you kind of now move beyond your own organization and assist sort of digital inclusion, I guess, for the client groups themselves. What role do you see your organizations playing in that sort of interface level of actually going beyond just helping your own staff to get online and navigate around their organizational systems, but then how the client side can also be assisted in that way?
Yeah, I was hoping to ask you that, Chris, to be honest, because our role as working with some disadvantaged people is to try and support them, help them develop their skills, and lead fulfilled, connected lives within society. And as I said earlier, a large proportion of our client group are missing out on the internet, missing out on emails, missing out on social media. Now, that might be a good or bad thing, I'm not sure, but at least the option, it would be great if the option was available. Specifically our role is about housing, but it incorporates so much more. And so, as for that next step in assisting them to engage more within technology, it's definitely not our major focus, but it's a periphery focus. And it's at the moment, it's just through modeling and guidance from individual workers, but we don't have a coherent plan. And as this has continued, I've been thinking it would be great if we did. So that's why I wanted to talk to you, Chris.
Fantastic. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to weigh in on that subject, David.
Oh, we'd all love to hear from you too, Chris. But I mean, from my side, I think it'll become increasingly important as well as kind of if we talk about, kind of these increasing digitally based services. And as I said before, I don't think that's a replacement in any way for face-to-face services. But as more people kind of use some of the digital technology to interface with services, to their benefit for them, then, how that kind of role of helping communities kind of get to grips with that technology is going to become a lot more important. And there's a few things. I think one is clearly the staff working in the services need to have, their own level of digital skills up to a certain level so they can help others. And the other is, I think there's some great programs out there that people can look at. I think Joe put into the chat the Be Connected program, which is a federal government initiative run with the Good Things Foundation around building the digital capability of seniors. There's a program Infoxchange runs with Google called Digital Springboard, which is about helping people improve their digital skills for work. There's a lot of these programs out there, but I think it's thinking about how we can connect those two things together. And whereas caseworkers might not necessarily have seen previously that they had a role to play in this, as people are making more and more use of digital technology to connect with the services, they will have a bit more of a role in that. So how can we empower and enable them, rather than just saying, here's something else you have to do on top of your already, high and busy workloads?
Yeah, I think they're excellent points, David, and well said, because I think that's where this interfacing needs to happen, where we need to see our staff across multiple sectors as being not only conducting their own form of work, but also playing a role as a sort of digital connector and a kind of digital leader, I guess. And we've seen that. I think there's some things in the UK coming out of the NHS around the way they're looking at their staff in terms of the health interface, and thinking about their staff as being able to provide that sort of technical support if you want to move into a telehealth space. It's obviously going to be vital. So I think we're going to have to wrap it up in a moment, but I really just want to take this time to thank David, Catherine and Mark. I think it's been quite a wide-ranging discussion, and I like how we've gone from sort of research to kind of policy and practice issues, to practice and change at the institutional level. I think it's been that really multi-dimensional kind of webinar in which you really get to see things from different perspectives. The chat function has been excellent. There'll be, I'm sure our panelists will be interested in looking through the chat after this, so they can have a look at some of the really exciting discussions going on. And a lot of love for digital transformation, the Digital Transformation Hub, and the leadership being shown in that space. So I'm now going to pass back to Rhonda, and she will wrap things up for us. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you so much to our panelists, David, Mike and Catherine. Really appreciate your time and your knowledge and all of your insights. So we'll wrap up today. I just wanted to say, please visit impact2020.online. We're just about to announce the December webinar and going into 2021, other webinars. But thanks again to everyone, and also to our attendees for coming along and asking great questions and giving lots of nice chatter in the feed. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.